we'll know what are the kinds of partnership under Indian Partnership Act. As given by your Indian Partnership Act, there are mainly three partnerships you find, the different kinds of partnerships. The first partnership is partnership for a fixed term. The next one is partnership at will. That's given under section 7 of the Indian Partnership Act. And the third one is particular partnership, which we have already discussed, and it comes under section 8 of Indian Partnership Act. Now let's proceed further and let's know what are these kinds of partnership, what are the ingredients, what are there in this particular partnership. Partnership for a fixed term. What is a fixed term? It is all, you will already get to know that it is for a fixed term, that is the duration is fixed. Suppose if the partners agree that yes, we will be having the business transaction for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, whatever may be the duration of their partnership, it will come to end after the term is over. In case if they want to continue the partnership, they can continue. They can either continue it for another having another period fixed for it, or they can continue as a partnership at will. Now let us know what is partnership at will. But before that, you understand. In case if the duration is completed, they still can continue this partnership with the consent of all the parties, or else they can convert it to partnership at will, that is given under section 7 of Indian Partnership Act 1932. Then coming to partnership at will. What is this at will? By this word you get to know what it is. At will, it means it is at their discretion. It is whatever decision they want to take regarding this, that is whatever the date, maybe the business nature of the business, or any time they can have a fixed time. So it is all their decision. They can take a decision regarding that. That is what is called as will. It is given under section 7. So it says that your section 7 says that when no provision is made, please be clear with this, when no provision is made in the partnership agreement as to the duration. First point is as to the duration. There is no time limit fixed as it is fixed here. So no duration is fixed. And when there is no provision in the partnership agreement as to the determination of the partnership. What is this as to the determination of partnership? So when is it coming to end? So nothing is fixed. Then that is called as partnership at will. It is totally their discretion. At their discretion, they are going to have the business. They are going to run the firm. Clear with this? So that is called as partnership at will. And you can, in this case, I told you it is totally at their discretion. But it can suggest a method how to dissolve. Like how there are different methods of dissolution. They can decide upon it how to dissolve. To dissolve the firm. Also, partnership can be dissolved by one person, one partner, expressing his willingness to dissolve. In case one of the partners says that, okay, let us dissolve this firm, then he can dissolve it. How can he dissolve? Can he just say that, let us dissolve it? So no, there are some procedures that has to be followed. He should give a formal notice. He has to give a notice that to the entire partners. If there are more than 10 partners, to all the partners, he has to give a notice, and the notice has to reach everyone, saying that we will terminate this following partnership. So, and when he gives a notice, so what is the, from which date should it be considered that the firm is going to dissolve? So, the dissolution takes place from the time specified in the notice. If any time is specified in the notice, from that day it is going to be dissolved, or else if no time is specified, dissolution will take place from the time the notice is communicated to all the parties. From the time when he is giving the notice, from that day itself, the particular partnership will be dissolved. It stands dissolved. Clear with this? That is what is partnership at will. The next partnership is particular partnership. What is this particular partnership? We have already studied. So particular partnership is given under section 8, which says that particular partnership between partners whereby they engage in a particular adventure or an undertaking. So there is one, they decide before entering into the contract of partnership, they decide that okay, we will have one particular business to do. For example, It might be a coal mining or even the cinematography. That is, if they are producing a movie, if they are making a movie, let's take an easy example. They want to do a movie. For that, different stages are there, and also it takes certain time, right? So they are becoming the partners. Two, person A and person B are entering into this partnership business only to make some movie. So it takes certain time. There are certain steps involved in it. There are certain stages in that. So for that period, they are going to be the partners. This is what is called as particular partnership. The best example is, remember, production of your movie, production of a film, or even the coal mining. Coal mining was also got certain stages, and it cannot be done in a day. It takes some years together. Clear with this? So there might be need of some production workers. All those have to who are going to pool the money for all those things. It is partners. They come together and they do it, and ultimately whatever the profit they got, they're going to distribute among themselves. So particular partnership means it is for a single adventure or an undertaking. Clear with this? In case after a particular partnership is being ended, after certain work is completed, they still can continue the partnership, but it becomes partnership at will. They can convert it into partnership at will. It won't be a single adventure then, or single undertaking. They're not going to do one work, one particular business. They can even diversify with the same partners, having the same partner. That is, for example, we'll take partner A and partner B have come together for production or for producing a movie. Now the movie is over. They still want to do further business. They can continue, and they can get converted into partnership at will. Clear with this? So these are the three important kinds of partnerships which you find in your Indian Partnership Act. So this is going to be a very important question for you. So please do remember this. And also there are other partnerships also, which you'll be getting in your questions. You can even mention LLPs also, limited liability partnership, one who contributes for a specified amount of capital or property. And there is also sub-partnership. Sub-partnership is what we'll be discussing. It is implied by the law that when one of the original partner transfers his interest in the partnership property by sale, mortgage or otherwise. In such a case, assignee is entitled only to the assigned right and not the general rights of a partner. You won't be getting all the rights of general rights what we have discussed of a partner. He won't be getting. He'll be getting just whatever has been assigned to him, only pertaining to that he'll be getting his right. Clear with this? So these are the different kinds of partnership, and this is the most important one. Next, coming to the types of partner. We have been discussing about partnership. Now this is very important from the examination point of view. But just for your understanding, we are discussing what are the types of partners. So what are the types of partner? The first one is active or managing partner. What is this active or managing partner? As the name itself indicates, active partner means the person who actively participates in all the business transaction. He is going to be actively participating, and he is also called as managing partner, who manages all the transactions of the firm. Is basically the managing partner. The next one is dormant or sleeping partner. Dormant means he does not usually participate in the daily business activities. Simple. It is just opposite of active partner. He does not participate in all the works that is related to the firm. But yes, he is also going to he'll also be liable for the loss and also for the profits. Clear with this? Then we have something called nominal partner. What is nominal partner? This nominal partner, he does not have any real or significant interest in the partnership. In the sense, he's just giving his name. He says that when you have a partnership firm and when you're giving some notice or something, they say that this particular person, maybe because he's quite famous or something, so they just use his name, but he does not have anything related to this partnership. He's only lending his name. Clear with this? Just remember, he only lends his name. He will not make any capital contribution to the firm, and so he'll also not have a share in it. The nominal partner, he's only giving his name. The next partnership is partner by estoppel. The next type of partner is partner by estoppel. What is estoppel? If a person holds out to another that he is the partner of the firm either by words or his conduct or by his actions, then such partner cannot deny that he is no more a partner. If by his actions, we studied this long back in the agency also, estoppel, holding out. So what was it? Through actions, if he says that yes, he is a partner of this firm, and there is any business transaction taking place, considering him, assuming that he is a partner of that firm, then he cannot hold back. That is what is called partner by estoppel. The next partner is partners in profits only. So who is this partner in profits? He's only sharing the profits. He does not have, he will not be liable for any such losses. Clear with this? Next, minor partner. What is this minor partner? We've already studied about this, right? Minor partner, competent persons. When we are discussing about the incompetent persons cannot enter the partnership, we also discussed about minor. Well, we'll also be further discussing about the minor because we have it in one of our duties which we are discussing now. Well, minor partner, for your brief explanation, is a person who is not actually competent to enter in the eyes of law, but still in the partnership he can enter into this particular, he can be a partner, he can enter into partnership, and he will be only made entitled to take the profits. He can take the profits, but he is not liable for any of the losses. After knowing different kinds of partnership, now let's move on to the next topic, that is relation of partners to the third person. Who are this third person who are transacting with firm? So these third persons are the persons who enter into a contract with this firm for dealing in some business. Now, what are their relation to the third person is the thing what we are going to study. Another, section 18. The section 18 is a very important section that gives you a relation between the partners on one hand and the third person on other hand, and that particular thing, the relation of partner on one hand and the third party on another hand, you get to know through this section 18. So what is the section 18? Section 18, under section 18, the partners to be the agent of the firm. It is said that the partners are the agents of the firm. What did we study under the essentials? The fourth important essential, that is mutual agency, acting on behalf of all, or a person who's acting on behalf of all, or everyone is acting for the firm. They are making something profit for the firm. So benefit to the firm they are doing, and that is based on the mutual agency concept. This section 18 tells us that the partner is to be the agent of the firm, and that particular concept is based on mutual agency. So every partner, what this mutual agency says is every partner having the capacity to act as a firm's agent, and the act done by any partner renders the whole firm liable towards the third party. It says that if a partner, let's assume that there are 4 partners in the firm. Let's get back to our old example. Partner A, partner B and partner C, and partner D, 4th partner. Now this partner C, the third partner, he enters into some contract with the third party, outside party. He enters into a contract. So from that contract, whatever, if there is any profits, who's going to be benefited? It is going to be benefited to this partnership firm, right? In a whole, to the firm and to the partners, right? In same way, when there is a benefit to all, there is also a loss to all. So this partner, now the partner C, he is acting as an agent. He is acting as an agent for partner A, partner B and partner D, and he is entering into the contract with third party. Clear with what is mutual agency means? Always remember that this particular partnership is founded on the principle of law of agency, that is the law of principal and the agent relationship. Do apply always. This application is very important when there are certain things, when we are also discussing this particular sections, we come across telling that how the principal and agent is liable for the acts of the agent, how principal is made liable. In the same way, by the act of one partner makes other partner as well as firm liable. Clear? So always remember, when we are discussing the partnership, it is based on law of agency. So relations of partners to the third person are founded on the principle of this mutual agency. Always this mutual agency is very important for your third person. How a principal becomes liable for the third party for the acts done by an agent. In the same way, same application to your partnership also. Clear? Next, chapter 4 discusses the relation of partners to the third person, and section 18 to 30 you find this particular provisions relating to the relation of partners to third person. The first one under it is nature and extent of liability of the firm for the acts of partner. That's discussed under section 18 to 27. So first is nature and extent of liability. Basically it is nature. What is the nature of the Partnership Act, and what is the extent of liability of the firm for the acts of partners? So how do the other partners become liable? How are they becoming liable for the act of one partner who is acting as an agent for their company, is what we are going to discuss here. The next one is doctrine of holding out. This is discussed under section 28, where we will be discussing in detail what exactly is doctrine of holding out. Now let us know what are those sections we are dealing with. Then right of transferee of a partnership interest. That's discussed under section 29. Then at last we'll be getting to know what is the position of minor under section 30. Now let's go one by one and discuss what it is. Okay. Now we'll take the first one and discuss about it. The first one is nature and extent of liability. As I told, it is discussed from section 18 to 27. So nature and extent of liability. Here we are going to study this nature and extent by dividing it into 2 points. The first one is nature of liability of partner towards third parties. So what is the nature of liability? How are they liable towards the third parties? And the second point is the kinds of acts which the partners are liable. There are certain kinds of acts. Under this we have got really 7 different kinds of acts which tells you how partners are liable to third parties, and I'll give you the list what it is. The first one, well, we'll be discussing all those things in detail. Before proceeding that, I'll just give you a list of whatever it is. The first one discusses the liability for the acts done within the authority of the partner. That is discussed under section 18, 19, 20 and 22. It tells what are the liability, what is a liability when the acts are done within the authority. Please connect it to your agency thing. Agency war concept, we have already studied this. So this particular authority which is given, it may be either express or implied. The same thing again is going to be repeated. So first kind of act is given liability when act is done within the authority, and that can be express or implied. The second one is, the second kind of act is liability when partner acts in emergency, in case of emergency situation. If the partner does some work which he is not authorized to do, then how is he liable? That is discussed under section 21 of Indian Partnership Act. Here, the next kind of act, the third kind of act what we are going to discuss is liability on ratification of Partners Act. That's discussed under liability of ratification is discussed under this Indian Partnership Act. Again, remember what we have studied under agency. The same thing will be discussed here also. So ratification, what do you mean by ratification? Ratification means acceptance. Same thing when the agent, please try to relate it. It's the same thing you are going to be having here also. So the third one is liability on ratification of Partners Act. The fourth liability, the fourth kind of act which makes partner liable is liability on notice to an acting partner. If a notice is given to an acting partner, or a notice is given by him, what happens at those situations that are given under section 24 of Indian Partnership Act. The next 6 kind of act is liability for torts and wrongful acts. Liability for torts and wrongful acts, it is given under section 26 of Indian Partnership Act. What is the liability? If a partner does any tortious act, or if he commits any wrong on the part of the firm, what happens? Or you can just say that if he is doing any tortious act to any third person, we are speaking in relation to the third person, right? Tortious act to in third person. How does the firm become liable in this situation? To be more clear. Then the last kind of liability, that is 7th we are going to study, is liability for misapplication of money or property. In the previous topics we studied about partnerships, property, right? So there, what did we discuss? That it should not be there should not be a misapplication. Instead, it should be used for the business sake only and not for the personal application. Clear with this? So that is the last liability. So how does a partnership or a firm become liable when they misuse the property or money? That's given under section 29, and we'll be discussing in detail. So these are all quite simple, and we have already studied previously in some or the other while discussing acts or rights or duties. Rights or duties, and also we have discussed this in our agency topic also. So the agency, remember the term mutual agency. From that is a very important essential of your partnership act. And also some of there are many, there are many provisions where you see that it is overlapping. I mean, the same thing is repeated in partnership also. Now let's go one by one and find out what it is. The first one, the nature of liability of partners towards the third party. Always remember, when we are generally speaking, all partners of the firm are equally responsible. They are always equally responsible for any act performed by any one of them. They become responsible since it is a mutual agency contract. They become responsible for the acts done by a partner. One partner does anything, all are responsible, since they share the profit also together equally, and they are also liable for the losses. So in simple, you can say that they are to sink and swim together. So whatever happens, they have to go together. Clear with this? Now let's proceed. So under nature of liability of partner towards third parties, which is given under section 25, before proceeding to this, what exactly is section 25, I'll just make you I'll tell you the concept of it, and so that it makes easier to understand. So always a principal is liable for his agent's act, right? So who is liable for agent's act? It is always the principal. If the agent is doing by himself or on behalf of his principal, still the principal is liable. So according to section 18, what we discussed about section 18, it says, what does it say? That partner is an agent of a firm. It stated that partner is an agent of the firm for the purpose of firm. Whatever the business the firm is carrying on, for that purpose the partner becomes an agent. Now we are going to relate all this concept to this particular section, that is section 25. So by that section 18, and by knowing the concept of that principal and agent, the same thing we are going to apply, and thereby we can infer that whole of the firm, which means all the partners of the firm become liable for the act of the person, act of any one of the partner. Whatever partner does, the entire firm is liable. That is partners. Entire firm in the sense partners. Now keeping all these basic concepts, and we'll relate it to this section 25. Section 25, it says that as regards to the nature of liability. When we are speaking about the nature of liability, every partner is jointly and severally liable. It says that every partner, when you are speaking about the nature of liability, you always remember that every partner is jointly and severally liable for the acts of the firm done while he is a partner. When a partner is doing any act, everyone is jointly and severally liable. So we'll take an example for this. Suppose a partner is there. He retires in 1991. When September 1st, 1991. And the act is done on 31st August 1991. Does he become liable for that? Because he was a partner. He still is a partner. So, till that day he becomes liable. Till his date of retirement he is liable. Now, we'll take another example. The act of the firm is done on 1st of March 2010. And the act is done on 1st of March 2010, and the partner, there is one partner A who is retired on 1st of April 2009. 2009 the partner has retired, and there is some act done in the year 2010. 1st of March 2010. Now, can that person who has been retired can be made liable? No. How he does not become liable? You can apply this particular section 25. So, by applying this particular section 25, that partner who has retired won't be liable because the act was done after he has been retired. It is only during the course of business. The act's done by any partner. All the entire firm or all the partners become liable. Under that, to understand this section 25 properly, we have certain points where we will be studying how the nature of liability is exactly towards the third party. What is exactly the nature of liability in the simple sense? The first one is several and joint liability. Section 25 only makes it clear that as regards the nature of liability, of the partner, every person is jointly and severally liable. Now, coming to this point, several and joint liability, the same thing. Your section 25 is applicable here also. So, what are you going to start saying that partners are severally and jointly liable to all the partners for the acts of the firm while he is acting as a partner, while he is a partner only. Do remember this? When he is a partner, then he becomes severally and jointly liable. This third party who has entered a contract, obviously this firm is entering a contract with a third party, and any one of the I'll be more specific, any one of the partner is going to enter into a contract on behalf of the entire firm. So, now this third party, there is any default by the firm. Now, he'll bring a suit against them. Now, whom do you think can he bring a suit? Can he bring a suit against the entire firm, or can he make only one partner liable? So, the third party who brings a suit against them can bring against any one of them. He can bring against any one of them. It is not necessary that since he has entered a contract with the person C, he has to file a case against C only. No, he can file a case against any one of the partners, or jointly, the entire firm, all the partners he can make liable. Clear with this? Clear? So, if third party, we will be more specific in here. If a third party is filing a suit against the partner for their default, he can file against any partner or the entire firm jointly. That is jointly. No individual, no partner can plead that action should not be brought against others, and he does not become liable. The partner can never say that he cannot become liable. So the action and you please bring an action against the person. Suppose we'll take an example. There are 4 partners in the firm. Partner C has entered into contract with third party. Now the person, the third party, he files a case against partner B. Now partner B cannot say that, see, you cannot bring an action against me because I have not entered. It is partner C who has entered. You please bring an action against him. No, he can never take that stand. Because for the acts of partner C, even partner B is also liable, partner A and partner D are also liable for it. So they can never take that stand that they won't be liable, or we can never ask that please make other partner also liable for this. In case if there is some case filed and the court says that yes, partner, you become one of the partner against whom the case is filed, you become liable to pay. The partner, if he is paying more than the share of his liability, there is a particular share of his liability that is entered at the time of agreement, and if that partner is paying more than his share of liability, then he can claim from the other fellow partners. He can ask other fellow partners to compensate for him. That is what is said in several and joint liability. The next point is liability for the acts of the firm. Liability for the acts of the firm. What is this acts of the firm? For this, we'll understand through this definition. An act or omission which creates a right enforceable is the act of the firm. There is an act or omission which helps in creating a right enforceable. You can enforce your right. That is called as an act of the firm. Clear with this? Whenever you find this word act of the firm, do remember it is something, there is some act happened, they are doing something, or they are omitting something. From that, there is a right which is being created. That is called as act of the firm. It may be a contract or a wrongful act. Maybe a contract, it is an act. Where I said in the definition, any act that can be a contract, any omission, any wrongful act. For example, it may be fraud or negligence or misapplication of money or in tort. For all those things, the partners are liable. And how are they liable? Go back to the several and joint liability. Clear? The next one is liability for the acts while a person is a partner. So as I told you, when they are a partner, when they are working for the business firm, then only they become liable. Anyways, this particular concept, that is liability for the acts while a person is a partner, is based on the mutual agency. Almost everything is discussed on the basis, on the lines of mutual agency itself. Where a person is a partner of the firm, where that particular person who is acting or whose acts, the firm is made liable, or all the other partners are made liable, he should be a partner of a firm. Not liable for the acts done before. That is, in case, we'll take an example and we'll understand this better. I'll give you an example so that you yourself can answer this question. For an instance, if a person is appointed today as a partner, he comes and joins as a partner, and a week before let's take not even a week before, a month before, that is today, this month is May, a month before, in the month of April, there is some contract entered between the firm and other person. Now there is some dispute relating to that particular contract which was entered in the month of April. There is a new partner, there is admission of new partner in the month of May. Do you think this new partner can be made liable for whatever the dispute has arose between the partners and the firm and the third party? No, he does not become liable. So any act done before, that is before the new partner is introduced into a firm, he does not become liable. And also, in case, I gave you an example already. When a person is retired, when a person ceases to be a partner, after he retiring from the particular partnership, and there is some contract between the firm and the third party, and if there is any dispute, does that person who is retired become liable for it? No. Once he retires, he does not become liable for the acts of the firm. But this particular provision is subject to certain conditions. There are certain conditions when even if a partner is retired from the firm, and if the firm has entered any new contracts for certain things, he becomes liable. How? In case that's mentioned under section 32 subsection 3 and section 45 of Partnership Act. It says that according to which, in spite of retirement, or as if the firm is also dissolved, the liability of the partner continues as before. What was their liability before retirement or before dissolution, it continues until the public notice of retirement or the dissolution of the firm is given. Till the public notice is given, so that everyone are aware of it, he continues to be liable. There should be some notice given that this particular person is retired and he is no more a partner of that particular firm. If there is a dissolution of a company also, there should be a notice given that this firm does not continue further, it has come to an end. This erstwhile partner, that is a partner who's been retired or is no more a partner in that particular firm, he is also liable under other one more condition, which is that he becomes liable to pay the tax due from the partnership firm pertaining to the period when he was a partner. When he was a partner, and the partnership has to pay a income tax, right? We have discussed this. It is treated as a person, it is treated as a legal entity for the purpose of paying tax, which is discussed under section 231 of Income Tax Act. Remember? Yes. There they had to pay certain tax. When suppose, we'll take an example. There is a partner who is retiring in the year 2020. When is he retiring? This year, 2020. So for the 2020 assessment is done in the next year, that is 2020-2021, right? He has to pay during that. Now, in case if there is a default in payment during that year, he is retired already, but still he becomes liable to pay the tax because he was a partner during that particular year. Clear with this? Then, liability unlimited. This is again the nature of the liability. Liability is unlimited. The liability of all the partners is not only joint and several. It is not only joint and several, but unlimited. That is, the third party can make either all or any one of them liable for any default. He can file a case against entire firm or any one person. So again the same thing, the partner cannot plead that agreement provides only limited liability for him or his responsibility only on a part of share of the loss. He cannot take any stand that he has a limited only for this much and his responsibility is only for a particular share of loss. It is only for this much of loss. Nothing. He cannot take anything. When they are a partner and if there is a case filed against him, he becomes liable. Later, partner paying more than the share can claim the contribution from his fellow partners. From his fellow partners, he can take the contribution. Clear with this? So, the nature and liability of partner towards third party is given under section 25. Section 25, always remember, say that what it says, it is sovereign and joint liability. You please connect this with section 18, wherein your nature and extent of liability is stated. Section 18 says about that a partner is an agent of the firm. Try to relate it with that and understand how they are related. The second point which we discussed under nature and extent of liability was the kinds of acts. There are different kinds of acts from which the partners are liable to the third person. So what are those acts? The first act I told you was within the authority, the act done within the authority of a partner. How are they made liable in case if it is within the given authority? That is discussed in the section 18, 19, 20 and 22, the most important sections under this. So within the authority, in the sense, as we are discussing the mutual agency concept, from that we can derive that partner is an agent of the firm and his acts binds the firm, right? And if he is acting within the authority, whatever the authority is given by the partners, that yes, you can go enter into contract, you can do these list of work and you cannot do all these things. They authorize him and they also say that they restrict him simultaneously. So for whatever he is authorized, he is doing within that given authority, then it is valid, right? And then how are they going to be liable? Always remember this particular thing you have to relate it with the contract of agency. As we have discussed there also in detail the what is within authority and how do you get to know the authority. In the same way, under partnership also it has been discussed. In order to know the authority properly, how can we infer authority must be known. How can we infer it? Either it is by express or implied mode. So what is express? If it is by words spoken or written, it is going to be expressed. Now what is implied? Coming to what is implied, inferred from the circumstances of the case. You can infer it from the circumstances of the case and things spoken or written in the ordinary course of business. If anything, whatever they are doing in the ordinary course of business, whatever they speak or whatever is written, then from that they can infer that it is implied mode. Now this particular implied mode is very important from your examination point of view, and we'll be deciding how do you infer that yes, this particular partners are liable. How do you get to know? Because it is not expressly stated that yes, this person is acting as an agent of this partnership firm and he's got an authority to do certain acts and he has got certain restriction. How do they get to know? It is only by circumstances. It is not given by expressly. So we'll be trying to understand how it is implied mode. Under that, first to understand it, let us know what is the scope of implied authority. That's given under section 19.1. So this particular section 19.1, it tells us what is the scope of implied authority. Under that particular section, we can derive two important things. The first, it says that the implied authority, for it to be covered under implied authority, it is necessary that the act should be done in relation to the partnership business. So whatever the business is carried on by the firm, for that particular business, the act should be done there. That is for the benefit of that business. In case other things, for the acts of the particular, for the improvement of that business or for the benefit of the business, the act should be done pertaining to that business only. The second thing what you can get to know from this particular section is the act should be done in the usual way. It should be done in the usual way as it is going on and as it was going on. In the same way, it should be done in relation to the business of kind carried on by the firm. Whatever the firm was carrying on, in the same way it has to be done. So these are the two important points from this section which you can infer. Clear with this? And this such authority, when such authority is given, such authority is known as implied authority, or else you can say it as an apparent authority, because from the face of it you can make out that yes, this particular act, whatever this particular partner is doing as an agent of the firm, this says that yes, he is an agent, even though if he is not given that authority expressly, but still from the acts you can make out that he is an agent. So it is an apparent authority or ordinary or ostensible authority. Ostensible also means apparent on the face of it, you can make out that yes, he is an agent of that particular firm. Clear with this? So, from all the acts which is done by the partner as an agent, others are also bound for those acts. And also, the important purpose, why is so important to have an implied authority is, see, this third party who wants to enter into a contract with a firm, he does not know to what extent the authority has been conferred to this particular partner. So suppose there are 4 partners, again we'll go back to our classical exam what I was giving. There are 4 partners and he's entering with contract with partners. He does not know what is the extent of authority given to him. Does that third party know? Never. He'll not get to know. He's just thinking that yes, he is a partner of that firm and he's working as an agent for partner A, B and D, and that is why he is representing the firm. That is why he is entering into the contract with them. So he does not know exactly all what are the terms and conditions, what they have entered. That partner, that third party doesn't know. So for that purpose, and also this third party is relying on the assumption that yes, such partner is an agent of a firm and he has got such authority. For that purpose only this particular concept of implied authority is given, so that in case if there is any default by the firm saying that no, this person we have not authorized him, but by the acts of the others it makes it clear that it is an implied authority and the third party won't suffer ultimately. For that reason only we have got concept called implied authority, under which we are studying how the implied authority affects the third person. So we got to know what is the scope of implied authority under this particular section 19.1. There is a case law for this, that is Mercantile Credit Company versus Garrod. In this case, there were 2 partners. There was a firm and there were 2 partners. Who were the partner? One was Parkin, Parkin. He was an active partner. And the second partner was this Garrod. And he was not an active partner, he was a sleeping partner or a dormant partner. He was not very much active. Then what was the firm? What was the business? Business was a garage business. It was concerned with letting lock up garage and repairing cars. They were into this. This was the primary business. And it was expressly given that they are doing the business for the sake. And they had another business, that was sale of second hand cars. It was not expressly shown. They did not have express authority. But still, it could be inferred by that they had an implied authority to sell second hand cars. It was not expressed, and by their acts it was inferred that yes, they had that implied authority to sell the cars. Then what happens? The active partner who I told you, that is Parkin, without authority, he sold a car to this Mercantile Credit Company Limited, over which he did not have a title also. He sold the car for around 700 euros and made some profit from this. Later, this company, Mercantile Credit Company Limited, they get to know that the seller, that is a Parkin, he did not have a title at all and he has sold the car. Then they bring they file a case against this person, Garrod, who was a sleeping partner or a dormant partner. And they claim whatever the amount they had paid to the Parkin, that is 700 euros. Euros. And this case goes to the court, and there it was held that the sale of car by one of the partner, that one of the partner has sold the car, was an act of carrying on in the usual way the business of the firm. It was impliedly shown that they were doing sale of second-hand business. So therefore, they had an implied authority. What did we study all this before when we are discussing about the liability, the nature and the extent of liability? We said that the jointly and severally liable. For anyone, even if a person If one of the partner enters into a contract and if he does any default, the other partner also becomes liable. So, and one more thing, what was important we studied is the third party can file a case against any one of the partner or all. Together he can file a case for all the partners. So here they have filed against Garrett, who was a partner of the firm. It was held that yes, it is an implied authority and therefore he was liable. The other partner liable. Clear with the case? Yes. Next, when there is some fraud taken place. When a person is given an implied authority and he commits certain fraud. The famous case is Lloyd versus Grace Smith and Company. That was this firm of solicitors. Hope you remember this case. Then when an old lady approached this particular firm, law of solicitors, regarding her two properties, and one of the clerk there who was acting as the agent for that, who was representing that principal there, he got it transferred in his name. Instead of sale deed, he prepared a gift deed in his name and he took the property and he further sold it and earned certain profits. So there the court made the principal liable. Hope you remember this case. This is a very famous case, Lloyd versus Grace Smith and Company. Here if it is anything related to fraud, you can please highlight this particular case for the scope of implied authority when if any agent or if any partner commits any fraud. Clear? Next, we have certain important points which we have to remember. First one is acknowledgement of a debt. If there is any loan, acknowledgement of the debt by a partner. Does it fall under implied authority? Yes, it is an implied authority. If there is acknowledgement of debt, yes, there is some debt which is established by implied authority, showing that if a person has made anything there, any loan, and by the implied acts it is shown that yes, the firm is liable for that loan, then it is an implied authority. Because we are discussing about the implied authority scope. So please do remember. Yes, if there is any acknowledgement of debt, then of a partner, then it falls under implied authority. Then registered firm. If the firm is registered and there is some case filed for that, and a partner has got an implied authority to sign the plaint or whatever it is, he can sign. That is through implied authority. Even though if it is not given expressly that if there is any case or if any action is there, suit is given, against the firm is there, at that time you should say no. It is an implied authority. Yes, they can sign it. Then we have got one more important point in this particular when we are discussing about the particular thing about the implied authority, that is statutory restrictions. If there is any statutory restrictions on implied authority, that is the next point, section 19(2). Statutory restrictions under section 19(2). What are the statutory restrictions? So under that, every partner may bind the firm by the following acts. So there is a list given which is pertaining to non-trading as well as trading partnership, which can bind the partners and make them liable. This particular section 19(2), it imposes restrictions on implied authority as a partner, and in the absence of usage or custom of trade, to the contrary, whatever the list is given, to the contrary, the implied authority of a partner does not empower him to do certain acts. If there is no no usage or customs of trade, that is contrary, then the implied authority of a partner does not empower him to do. And what are those lists now? First one is submit a dispute relating to a business to file arbitration. So he cannot submit a dispute relating to business of a firm to arbitration in case if he is not given such authority. The next one is open a bank account on behalf of the firm. He cannot do if he is not given an authority. And compromise or relinquish any claim by the firm. He cannot enter into compromise, or he cannot relinquish. He cannot say no to any claim by the firm. Then withdraw a suit on behalf of him. He cannot withdraw. Then admit any liability in the suit. He cannot even admit any liability. Then acquire immovable property which is belonging to the firm. In case a firm has got some immovable property, he cannot acquire it. Then standing as a surety cannot bind the other partners. If he is standing as a surety for other persons, then the partners won't be liable. Under all these things, under all this situation, the statutory restrictions on implied authority is stated under section 19 clause 2 or subsection. 19 subsection 2. Clear with this? The next point we are going to discuss here is one more important point which we have to discuss here is every partner can bind a firm by the following acts. I will tell you what are those acts which every partner can bind it. It is one first point we are discussing about a trading firm. The second one which we are discussing is about non-trading firm. The first one is may sell any goods. The partner can sell any goods or purchase any goods, receive payments of debts due to the firm, engage servants, borrow money on credit, issue bills, accept bills and other negotiable instruments of trading firm. Then coming to the non-trading partnership firm, for example solicitors, engineering works, or contractors or auctioneers, cinematographic theatre. These proprietors have no implied authority. They do not have implied authority to borrow money on the credit of the firm. They cannot borrow anything, whereas the trading firm, they can do it. They have got certain authorities. Well, I think you're clear with this. The first point what I wanted to say is I gave you the statutory restrictions after section 19(1), and again I came back to the points to establish that where a trading firm can enter into the transaction, what are those transactions, and when when there is a non-trading partnership, they cannot obtain credit on this basis of implied authority. There cannot be an implied authority, it should be an express authority. That is what is explained here. Clear with this? Then we'll go to the next point, that is mode of exercising authority, that's given under section 22. So the act falling within the implied authority of a partner, the firm will be bound if the act or instrument done or executed by partner has been done or executed. This is what a section 22 says. Executed, again you have points in that, in the name of a firm, in the manner expressing or implying an intention to bind the firm. So I'll try to break this and I'll explain it. What does the section 22 says is mode of exercising the authority. Under section 22 it says that the act which is coming under an implied authority, how will be the firm bound? It will be bound by an act, whatever the act they are doing, or in case if there is an instrument done, if through some instruments, negotiable instruments or any instruments, they're entering that, yes, if there is any promissory note, yes, by this I'm entering into a contract with you and you are liable to pay so much, even that can be happened. So the instrument is done, or if it is executed by a partner, it is said that it has been executed in the name of the firm. When it is done in the name of the firm, or in a manner which expresses that or imply that an intention to bind the firm. So it is done with an intention to bind the firm and in the name of the firm, then that becomes one of the mode of exercising the authority. Yes, then you are enforcing your implied authority and you are binding the firm. Who is that? A partner with an implied authority. That's given under section 22. So in case we have studied even in case of agency also. What was that? If any agent does any transaction in his own account, then does the firm become liable? Does the principal become liable? No, right? So even in the partnership, the same principle should be applied. If a person or a partner, to be more specific, a partner does any transaction in his name, then the other partners are not liable. If it is done in the firm's name or a manner expressing that the firm is being bounded by that act, then the firm, in the sense the partners become liable. Clear with this? Then extension or restriction of implied authority by agreement, that is given under section 20. This is all pertaining to your implied authority, remember. Section 20 lays down that the partners in a firm may, by contract between the partners, either extend or restrict the authority. They can give an extension of authority, or they can restrict it, whatever the authority is given to them. Clear with this? That is what your section 20 says. And also there is one second paragraph saying that notwithstanding any restrictions or any act done by a partner on behalf of a firm which falls under his implied authority binds the firm, unless the person with whom that partner is dealing with knows the restriction or does not know or believe the partner to be a partner. It says that there is one restriction imposed. It says that it is this particular restriction, whatever you are putting, if you are putting any restriction on the implied authority of a partner, this restriction is not binding on the third party, since we are talking from the third party's view, right? So since it does not bind third party, unless the third party has a knowledge about this restriction, is what it says, and the third party believes that he is a partner or he has got certain authority. He is believing and he is entering. He doesn't know that, then it is not binding. That is what is given in the second paragraph of section 20.